Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dinesh. I'm currently convener of the working group on millets of Revitalizing Rainfed Agriculture Network. I'll just give a brief introduction of the RRA network. RRA network was formed in 2007 to come up with policies and programs which are most suitable for rainfed areas like millets, pulses, and oilseeds especially. The reason was that the most of the agriculture policies uh, were focusing most on the green revolution framework. Hence, instead of, let's say, location specific low input agriculture or diverse agriculture, we would be having a high yielding hybrid high chemical intensive uh, crops in the rainfed areas, which actually led to a great problems. For example, promotion of cotton has led to considerable agrarian distress, and also and its associated chemical inputs had a great effect on the rural uh, rainfed farmers. So, anyways, one of the key things that RRA network adopted was to revive millets in the country. And for last good 12 years, the network has worked across country with many stakeholders and has been able to pilot different initiative on millets. It includes a location-specific agronomic practices and piloting millets in ICDS, MDM, and PDS in different states. Working with the state governments to initiate a state-level initiatives such as Odisha Millets Mission, Telangana Millets Mission, and comprehensive revival of millets, and providing technical support to different state governments, NGOs, activists, civil society workers. In addition, we have been able to come up with different millet recipe booklets and have built a considerable knowledge base on the same. So we had a national convention in 2019. As an outcome of that national convention, we formed a national working group on millets. Dviji is one of our member of national working group. And as part of, as an outreach program, the working group on millets of RRA network and Dviji are organizing a no millet webinars. We believe this is one of the first steps of interaction. We would be very keen in getting in touch with interested people and work with them to build millet agenda in their areas or in their thematic domains. So this is one of the first, this is just a first step, and I think this is fourth talk in the series, and we have around 10 talks in total. And Miss Anita Reddy, who is also co-convener of working group on millets of RR network, she is from Sahaja Samruddha, who have stellar record on promoting agroecology, agrobiodiversity, and millets. She will be moderating the session. And with this, I hand over the session to Dviji and Anita and others to take it forward.
Thank you, Dinesh. Am I audible? Just confirming. At least on the last call I was.
Yeah.
Rahul, can you just go to the presentation mode?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
Dviji?
Please.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Dinesh, for the introduction. And today's welcome all to the No Millets webinar. Today's topic would be millet processing. That's principles, techniques, and challenges. Processing is one of the most critical part of the millets, where that makes food palatable and easily digestible. So, without wasting much time, I would ask Dviji to go ahead with the presentation. Dviji, over to you.
Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you, Anita. Yeah. Thank you, Anita. Dinesh, can you hear me? I hope I'm audible. Yeah. So once again, welcome to everyone, and apologies for the lack of our speaker videos being on, primarily because quite a few of us are having bandwidth issues. So we figured that it's better to be audible than be seen. and of course, be able to see the screen, which luckily for us, Rahul has a good connection and he's been able to share a screen. So today this is part of a 10-part series. Let's go to the next slide, Rahul. And in each webinar, we are trying to address different aspects of millets and the millet value system, ecosystem, value chain. Today we are going to talk about processing, but just before we dive into that, a few things. There are slide numbers, so if you have any questions, please note down the slide number for easy reference. And the previous sessions, as well as the slides from the previous sessions, recordings of the previous sessions, the slides from the previous sessions, some summary about the webinar and the question answers of each of the webinars that have happened so far. They've all been posted on the KMW 2020 site. The link is there on the slides itself, so feel free to visit that anytime. And the session is also streaming live on YouTube, so you can ask your friends to join on the RRA Network channel, or just go to the website and they'll be able to find that from there. And another thing, all the attendees' mics have been muted, so please type out any questions that you might have, so that the moderator will be able to see that and take it up during the Q&A discussion. So I'll try to keep my presentation to under 20 minutes. And can we go to the next slide, please? So the next slide business is happening because, as I mentioned earlier, network issues. So Rahul, a friend of ours, who's putting all these things together for us, he is sharing screen, and I have to ask him to change every time we are scrolling. So in this presentation, we are going to be talking primarily from a processing perspective. And by processing, I don't just mean mechanized, it could be manual as well, but the basic principles of processing. What are the different stages of processing? What are the techniques and what are the challenges? And of course, we'll end up with a short summary. So let's go to the next one. So there are two types of millet grains. There are the naked grains and the husk grains. So the naked grains are the ones which do not have a husk layer. And the famous one among these are ragi, jowar, bajra, finger millet, pearl millet, sorghum. If we think outside of millets and among general cereal grains, wheat is a naked grain, whereas paddy is a husked grain. So even today, there's quite a bit of ragi, jowar, bajra in different places. So there's still some local infrastructure, and the skill on using these things still exists. But there are certain issues because these millets are highly susceptible to pests. They're extremely nutritious, not just for us, for other species as well. So yeah, so that's a bit of a challenge when it comes to naked grains, but we'll come to that later on. Let's go to the next slide. So among the husk grains, we have kodo millet, proso millet, little millet, barnyard, foxtail, brown top. So a lot of different millets which fall under the husked millet category. These, as long as the husk is intact, they are extremely low susceptibility to pests. They are susceptible to fungal, but that's extremely rare situations. We typically use them in their rice form, which means that the husk is taken out and we can consume the inner rice kernel. But then, unfortunately, over the years, the cultivation practices, consumption practices, as in how to cook, what to make, and various such things, and of course, the local infrastructure in terms of the supply chain and the skills to handle these things, to grow these things, have been lost over time. So we need to rebuild this. So these are some of the issues that I'm going to talk about in this session. Let's go to the next slide. So when it comes to processing, what do we mean by processing? For naked grains, it's a different thing. For the husk grains, it's a different thing. But there are some basic principles that are still the same. For example, you still have to pre-clean the grains, you have to grade the grains. With naked grains, we directly go into milling, which means either flour or typically a flour. And then once you have ground it into a flour, you need to make sure that there's nothing else that you don't want. So you kind of sieve it or clean it, and then you use it. So for a typical unit, unit as in mechanized unit, a machine shop kind of thing, where you can process these grains. you would need to spend anywhere from 1 to 5 lakhs, infrastructure, all these things included. And about 2 people can work these machines and be able to get quality output. Let's go to the next slide. With the husked grains, it's a little more challenging. Even here we need to do pre-cleaning, even here we need to do some grading. But then instead of milling or grinding it into flour, what we do is we dehusk or hull the grains, which means that we take out the outermost layer, which is the hard cellulosic layer that we cannot digest. So once that is done, we need to clean it because it will be a mix of various things that will come out, and various things as in various components. Some will be hulled, some will be unhulled, and therefore we'll need to separate out the grains, the rice from the grains in order to be able to consume it. So for a typical unit, we can spend anywhere from 5 to 25 lakhs. As in, I'm just giving a ballpark here. You can do it at much cheaper, you can do it at much more expensive, just a ballpark. And these are small scale units in close to the production. I'm not talking of big commercial units. Anywhere from 2 plus 1, I'm putting the plus 1 because there will be some amount of work that will be involved, which will be related to the material that's brought in. So therefore, even the farmer or the community person who's brought the material to the shop or the mill can stay around and help out and get this done and take it back. So we would need some training in order for people to use these machines, or even in many cases, actually even to do it manually, we will need to train people. So that's how processing of husk grain is today. I mean, I'm not trying to give you the full details of what happens where and when, just a broad overview so that I can give you a fair enough picture to have a sensible discussion and also get an idea of what is involved in processing. Let's go to the next slide. So in each of the next few slides, I'll talk about each of the stages of cleaning, of processing. And the first one, if you noticed in the previous slides, is pre-cleaning. So by the way, these slides are available online and they will also be circulated among all the registrants. So you can go through it at your own pace, identify your questions and email us or write to us, or throw it up in the next webinar, share it in the next webinar, sorry. So pre-cleaning is the first stage. This can happen either at the farm gate, which is preferred, or as soon as the material lands in the processing unit. As you can imagine, there will be a lot of dust that comes along with these grains, and so therefore doing it in the farm makes a lot of difference. Essentially, we use the principles of differentiating density or size. I guess most of you would have seen some movie or the other where there's this man or woman who's dropping grains off a winnowing pan from high above their head, and in the breeze or under the fan, this material dust being blown off, dust, straw, and various other things. So the idea of pre-cleaning is basically to take out material other than grains, the extra large ones as well as the extra small ones, because these two get separated quite easily, and it allows for easier working environment and better processing in the downstream steps. So that's about pre-cleaning. Let's go to the next one. In grading, essentially, we are trying to separate out the large, the intermediate, and the small grains. And essentially, again, that's when we do it according to size. We can also do density grading, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But essentially, by doing these gradings, what we are allowing is we are distinguishing between the quality of the grains that we have in our pre-cleaned set or sack of pre-cleaned grains. So why do we need to do this? We need to do this because the more uniform the grains are, the more uniform the output will be. And we'll come to this a little later as well. But grading is a very critical step in the processing of either the naked grains or the husked grains. Let's go to the next one. Destoning is of course one of the most important steps because nobody likes to get pebbles or stones in their rice or flour. So we really need to be careful about taking out all the stones. The stones don't grow on the plants, but unfortunately during the handling of these grains, invariably pebbles and mud balls and stones get mixed up and gets carted into the processing unit. So we typically need to take out these stones, and it can, by the way, all these steps, even though I have put these schematics, it doesn't mean that it's only done by machines. It can also be done by hand. In fact, quite a few places and people do it by hand most of the time. But there are machines to do this work as well. So the objective is to remove stones and pebbles, but what we have to recognize is that it works on the basis of density. So it's not just stones and pebbles that come out, but we can also take out seed grade grains. So grains that are really nice and heavy and would make good seeds. So such grains are also taken out along with the pebbles and stones so that they can go back to the farm and therefore lead to an improvement in the quality of the crop. Unfortunately, not many units do that, but wherever we are trying to set these things up, we are encouraging and training people to do this so that the overall quality of the yield and the returns for not just the yield, but the quality of the crop, both in terms of yield as well as the quality, improves because the seeds will be much better. Let's go to the next one. So the next step is there's a distinction. There are the husk grains which get dehusked or hulled, and then there's the naked grains which get milled or ground into flour. So we want to make sure that it's even and uniform milling, because even with flour, you can get flour of different sizes, as in fine, coarse, dust, talcum, etc., etc. We need to be very careful about what we are trying to do, because uneven sizes do give a very bad cooking quality, and sometimes even the taste will change with the change of the size of the grains or the particles. So even with the flour, we need to be careful. We need to try and get a uniform size. And with the husked grains, it's even more of a challenge because we want to retain the bran layer while taking off the husk layer. So, and not just retain it, we want to minimize the damage to it. We talked a little bit on this both in the presentation as well as in the discussion of the second session. So if you want to know more about why the bran layer needs to be retained and what are the motivations to do that, please do go back to the or view the recording of the second session on the RRA Network YouTube channel. Let's go to the next slide. So once the grains have been dehusked or hulled, we need to clean them, because there will be some grains that are unhulled, and there will be some grains that would have shattered and would have become grits. Grits yani dalia tukde ya kannadaದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನುಚ್ಚು ಅಂತೀವಿ. So that also needs to be taken out, because we want the rice and not the grits and the flour. We want that separate. Now, even during these operations, we need to minimize the bran loss and bran damage, and that's something that we need to keep in mind when doing these operations. With the naked grains, we don't have to worry about retaining the bran, because most of the bran does come through, but the parts of the bran that don't get milled as in ground to a flour, they will still remain as pieces, and that would need to be taken out, because as I was mentioning earlier, especially with flour, if it's not of a uniform size, it would lead to different other repercussions which we don't like. So we generally remove them by sieving or cleaning, and that's the next stage of processing. And let's go to the next one. So this gives you a broad idea of what are the stages of processing and what are the different principles that we use. Differentiation by size, differentiation by density, whether we are using manual tools or we are using machines. Now, what are the challenges in millet processing? Because that's, I think, one of the main things that, like Anita mentioned in the beginning, it's the critical step in converting a potential resource into an available resource. which is what we call as food in this case. So what are the challenges? So the main challenge with millets is that because it's rain-fed crop, these are rain-fed crops, they have a lot of variation. And variations, I don't just mean in size and color, but also in various physical characteristics. So how brittle is the husk? How easily will the kernel shatter? What are the bran characteristics? How easily will it get damaged? How well is it adhering to the grain kernel, the rice kernel? So these are all characteristics that we do not have a control on. And invariably, today's modern agricultural processing, agricultural technology has gone in the route of controlling for this by regulating the seed varieties, having a common package of practice. But even after all that, with paddy, we have not been able to achieve it. And more than anything else, or rather more than that, what we have to recognize is that these diversities in variety, diversities in cultural processes, methods, and various other aspects are very important when we look at it in terms of food diversity, in terms of climate resilience, in terms of, even for that matter, these kinds of pandemic resilience is what I would put it as, where local processes, or local production, local processing is, and local consumption is any day, a short supply chain is any day ideal scenario, and we would like to build towards that future, to build a sustainable food system. So we do want to keep these variations, but in order to be able to process them, we of course then need to be careful about having that flexibility built into our machines, our tools, our process. And all these flexibility means that there will be decisions to be made while you're processing, which means that there has to be skill development. And unfortunately, agriculture is one sector that has been de-skilled for the past a few hundred years, and more so in the last 50, 60 years. So we really need, our work is cut out when it comes to bringing back millet processing, and even for that matter, not just processing, but millets back into the supply chain and into our lives. So let's go to the next slide. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is this whole issue of bran. It's great because most of the nutrition in the grain is in the bran. Only the carbohydrates are in the rice kernel. There's some amount of protein in the germ. Oh, by the way, the grain structure I could not include in these slides. Please refer to the slides in the first and the second presentation webinar, and you will be able to see the grain structure as well as a little more about the bran and the nutrition. So we need to minimize the damage to these grains, and therefore to the bran layer, and therefore we need to appropriately design our machines and tools and process. And again, skill development is very important, because we should be able to recognize whether the grain has lost its bran or not. So what you see in this image, I'll just take a second to highlight this. The grain that's closest to the ruler, that's the steel thing on the right is the ruler, just to give you the millimeter marks. And the grain that's closest to it is brown, and that's the rice grain of Kodo millet. And the one closest to that grain is the dark colored thing to your left is the unhulled grain. And below, towards the bottom, there's a whitish colored grain. That's the Kodo millet rice grain with its bran, scratched and ripped off a little bit. So you can see the white rice kernel inside and some of the bran layer as well. So the other rice grain over here has quite a bit of its bran intact. And ideally, we will have processing such that there's more of these with bran intact and very little damage, and not these other grains which are, have seen a reasonable amount of damage to its bran. So that's where we need skill in order to be able to recognize, oh my, it's getting damaged, let me change something, and stuff like that. Let's go to the next one. The other challenge is, of course, pest management. Whether we are doing it with machines or manually, we need to make sure that our space and the tools that we use and the process that we use, how we handle the material, they should all be sensitive to the fact that you can get pest infestation. and not just can, but any place where we are processing grains, that's where we have the maximum probability for infestation. The adult pest will lay its eggs, and we won't necessarily see the the pest laying its eggs in the grains or in the rice rather, but after it has been packed and shipped, we will get a report saying that, hey, this thing has infestation. So they haven't opened the packet yet at all, and there would already be infestation. So till when the husk is intact, it's very, very low susceptibility to pests. In fact, it's pretty much zero. But once the husk is off, it's so nutritious, and there are so many other species which like this food and have grown with this food in some sense, because they have been around for at least a few million years longer than we humans have been. So they do get to it much faster than we can. And having dirty machines or a bad processing space. I mean, any of you who has gone to a paddy rice mill or even a flour mill for that matter would remember how material is lying around without being kept. I mean, where the place has not been kept clean. So there's a big requirement to understand, to help people understand the need for a clean, hygienic space, and also appropriate design of machines and tools. So this is a machine, this is the inside of a machine. Now, nobody would expect that grains would fall inside a machine, and every time after running the machine, you have to open it up and clean it. But that's unfortunately the case. This is the grains that are sitting around on the motor, and even on the box, on the inside of the box, you can see some of the grains sticking to the wall. Now, as you can imagine, these things would, I mean, we can't get to it, but the bugs can. So they will infest, and invariably that gets into our food as well. So we need to be careful about this. That's another big challenge in millet processing. So these are the broad challenges when it comes to millet processing. They're not intractable. There are ways to overcome these challenges, but it needs to be addressed. Let's go to the last slide, or the last but one. So the process of processing itself consists of simple principles. It's not very complicated. There are machines available to do these things. They need to be tuned and appropriately modified or redesigned, because they're not completely suited for what we want. And of course, there's a big requirement for skill development. And all these things will work primarily when we have a shorter and tighter supply chain. If we want to just replace paddy rice in the current supply chain that exists with millets, it's just not going to work if you want the nutritional qualities of the millets passed on to the consumer. So what you see on the right is a flow chart of the various steps in processing. Take your time later on. The slides are available, the video is available online. So whenever you want, you can browse through that and come back with your questions. Let's go to the last slide. So this presentation was possible because of contributions from various people, and this and the team, some of whom are here, many of whom are not here. These are some of the resources that we have put together, we as the larger we, the RRA network, and the various other organizations that are partners in this network. The millet.org, the millets.wordpress is another website where you can find a good amount of information started by a common friend of many of us. And then Rainfed India is another website. And the webinars website itself is in the footer, the web address, it's the millet.org/KMW 2020. And you can find links from there to various things. And there are a lot of material being posted there. We'll be updating it with a lot more content as well over the next few weeks. And yeah, so that's my presentation for today. Over to you, Anita, to moderate the Q&A and any other points that you would like me to discuss or to discuss. Thank you. Hi, Anita, are you there? You're muted. Maybe you can you
Okay.
hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me
Yes, now we
now? Hello? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Dviji. That was a very insightful presentation. And at every stage, the challenge has been for skill development. That's what I see in all your slides and the presentation. You have so focused on the processing, which is very critical. As the first I said, is the most critical part in the whole value chain of millets. So now I think we'll go on to the question and answers, and then I can do the summarization of it later. I'll go to the first question. The first question is there any nutritional analysis on puffed millet versus rice millet? Rice puff, sorry. Any nutritional analysis that you have of puffed millet and rice puff? Is there a comparative nutritional analysis that you have?
Yeah. So no, not that I know of.
Okay.
I mean, we have talked a little bit about how different processing affects nutrition in the second session. Not fully to the extent that you are requesting in this question, but no, not as far as I know. But one thing we have to recognize that the nutritional analysis is important primarily to give us an idea, a broad idea. But we should be careful to not deconstruct it into individual nutrients. And again, if we go back to the second webinar presentation, you will find the nutritional chart. And I always encourage people to use the chart in its entirety and not in individual columns or individual rows, because it's the diversity of nutrition that we derive from our food is important. We should not be aiming to achieve, or maximize nutrition from one particular grain. And even if we look at one particular nutrient, we should not be looking for it in a single source, because we eat different food groups, or we have evolved to eat different food groups, whether it is, pulses, cereal grains, oil seeds, meats, mushrooms, or, various other things. We have certain cultural limitations, and therefore we diversify our food in different ways in order to compensate for some food groups. But broadly speaking, we derive our nutrition from a diverse diet, and that is something that we should cherish, because if we are looking at a sustainable food system, even the food should be diverse. And some of these aspects we touched upon in the third session, where we talked about the need for food and nutritional diversity as well. So yeah, that's my response. I'm sorry that I don't have the exact answer for your question.
Okay. There's another question about Bucci method. In this method, is the bran intact? See, Dr. Kader, while he speaks about a particular method, Bucci method. So, consuming millets using Bucci method. In this method, is the bran intact? Is the question.
Well, yes and no. It depends on what you do after you soak the grains. So some people wash the grains rigorously, the rice rigorously, and try to get it to as white a color as possible. That I don't exactly know what Dr. Kader says with regard to this, but I know that quite a few people practice it that way. So that basically is where the bran is. As you saw in one of the photos earlier, the bran is an extremely sensitive layer. It comes off quite easily. And in fact, traditionally also, we took out the bran for some dishes when preparing certain dishes. We didn't want the bran on the rice. In Kannada, we call it kajaya. Telugulo arsi antaru. And I'm not sure in Hindi what it's called, but it's basically a paddy rice soaked and washed rigorously to take out any bran layer, and then pound when it is wet into a flour and soaked in or steeped in jaggery syrup and then fried in oil, and that's a sweet that comes out well only when you have taken off the bran. If the bran is there, the fiber content is there, which kind of ruins the taste and the texture. So in the Buchi method, you're supposed to soak it and then you're supposed to cook it. But quite a few people tend to throw the water without rigorous washing. Some people tend to use the water. So it all depends on how you use it. But I don't know what is practiced. So largely speaking, just one simple wash is enough. And rigorous washing, you will lose the bran, even if the rice that you purchased has the bran in it. And how do you recognize if there's bran or not in your rice? It's colorful typically. And more than the color, when you cook it on top of your rice, when you open cooking it, there'll be a thin layer of oil, scum-like layer, which is actually the most nutritious part of your rice, by the way. So a lot of people tend to throw that layer, but that's where most of the fiber, most of the fatty acids are. So I would strongly recommend using it. Or when you're cooking in a pressure cooker, it will be on the inside of your cooker. And I typically tend to wipe down the lid and the walls as soon as I open the cooker, so that whatever bran has come off and onto the vessel or the pressure cooker is put back into the rice and we consume that. So so that's about bran and how to get as much bran as we can from the rice that we have.
Okay, Vijit, the next question. 3 people have asked almost same similar one. So I'll just put all 3 together.
Sure,
is dehulling after parboiling? Louder?
Yeah.
Hello?
That's fine. I can hear you.
Hello? Dviji, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is dehulling after parboiling better than dehulling raw grain? That's one question. And the continuation to it is, how do we increase the shelf life of grains, hulled grains?
Yeah.
So one question is,
a couple of things.
Is dehulling?
Okay, you had a third one as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, we'll mix the 2 and I'll come to the third one later.
Okay. So the parboiling is a way where you boil the grain for a considerable amount of time with its husk on, and then you dehusk it. Now, parboiling is not just is, but does improve the quantity of nutrients that you get from the rice when you eat the rice. Now, having said that, it improves the nutritional value of the rice that is consumed. Having said that, we have to recognize that it takes a lot of energy to parboil. And we should also remember that 80%, close to 80% of the nutrients that we eat goes out of our body. Yes, it would improve we would get a better deal if we improve the amount of nutrition that gets into our body. But we should also see to it that, what is the energy that we are expending in order to do that. So as long as you have the husk intact, I'm going into the next question about the parboiling and the shelf life. As long as you have the husk intact, you have a reasonably good not reasonably good, you have an extremely good shelf life for the husked millets. And the challenge is when you take the husk off, because the nutrients become available to any of the other species as well, typically worms. So what we need to see is that as we need to either come up with a way in which we can save these nutritious rice from the pests. That is, make sure that there is no infestation before we pack it off and send it to the consumer, or even a store for that matter, or you process it as close to the consumer as possible. So for various reasons, we prescribe the second option rather than the first option. primarily because the shorter and shorter and tighter supply chains have a lot of other benefits, which I have already touched upon in terms of climate resilience, pandemic resilience, and various other aspects. The most important aspect, which again we have discussed in one of the earlier sessions, I think the first session itself, is the fact that it is much more equitable, in terms of access and equity. A shorter and tighter supply chain is better than a long supply chain with a lot of technology involved in it. So we focus a lot of effort on trying to get these things right, which is access and equity, and not just in terms of the millets, as in increasing the number of people eating millets, or improving the quality of the millets. The objective of most of our exercise, whether it's in the RRA network or in the Millet Foundation or various partner organizations, our focus is to see that we move to a more sustainable, a more just and equitable food system, where the producers have access to the material, that the nutrition that they are providing to a lot of consumers today, where consumers get good quality material, and where the consumers are not hurting the other stakeholders in the supply chain. So sorry, a slightly longer answer, but very important to put this in context, because parboiled is touted as the solution, but I personally do not think that's a solution, because the energy required is way higher than what most societies can afford.
Okay, Dwiji, to the next question now. What innovative practices need to be adopted during millet processing to make them attractive to the food market and competitive to other grains? I think you answered this already.
No, I will just put a quick point to this. A quick note.
But you can throw some light.
It's a very attractive question as well.
Yes, very attractive. That's right.
See, the biggest innovative method that innovation that we need to bring about is awareness among the consumer to identify what is quality and what is not. Unless the consumer can identify that this, is more nutritious and this is less nutritious, if we just depend on companies and brands or even testing agencies, that is not going to be sufficient. So I think the biggest innovation is actually to come on the consumer side and not on the processing or on the production side.
Okay. Now to a different question. What could be the first step towards skill revival at the district level or village level based on your experience in other regions? Shall I repeat the question?
No, I got that. I think so that's very... Please.
No, with that, there are two other questions, like, where can I get training? And this extends to say, what scale of training programs need to be done to develop skill at district and local level?
Very, very valid, very good questions. I'm very happy to hear these questions, because we really need to think of skill development and invest some resources towards that. Because most programs right now invariably look at increasing production or in making the market stronger and things like that, and not in the nuts and bolts of skill development and familiarity with the grains and identifying quality and things like that. So at what scale do we need? Well, the requirement is huge, but we have to set a target and move towards that. And what we are trying to do in the Millet Foundation, and to some extent in RRA and the larger network as well, is impress upon policymakers, whether it is in the private sector or in the public sector, to recognize that we need these skill training avenues for training people, skill development, and trying to start programs where people can be trained to do these things on a repeated basis. At what scale do we need? Well, like the first question identified, at least at a district level. If not at more finer, more closer to the ground level, but at least at the district level we need. But we can't get there right away because we need to train the trainers first. So the whole process is being started off. If you or your organization would like to participate in this, whether as trainees or as trainers, please do leave a comment or get in touch with us. Our contacts are everywhere on the web pages or on our slides. Feel free to contact us. One of our team members will come back to you, and we will be organizing training sessions in different parts of the country, and we will let you know whenever it's close to you, so that you can also participate in that and take this skills to a larger population. So I think that answers both the questions.
Now the next is where do we find machines? Okay, there are shortage of machines for processing produced locally indigenous crops. So where do we find small or medium scale industrial machines that will cater to the millet farming community? Machinery, where do we find the machinery?
Correct. Again, beautiful question. Really happy with this question as well. Very important for us to recognize that there is a need for machines, because the drudgery involved in manual processing is what has driven most families away from husked millets. And that's one of the reasons why we still have the naked millets rather than the husked millets around. One of them, not only, but one of them. So, and luckily for us, the principles are quite straightforward. There are machines that exist, but like I showed you in some of the photographs, they're not appropriately designed because they are designed for the conventional paddy rice value chain, where they don't really bother about the bran content. They don't really bother about pest infestation because they douse it in chemicals. But when we are talking of nutritious food, sustainable food, low impact on the ecology food, then we are not using chemicals for preserving or keeping pests away. So we need to be conscious of these parameters when we are designing machines. So while there are already machines that exist in the market space, there is still a lot of scope for new industries to come up. Just in the last 5 years, we have seen some, 10 to 15 new industries that I personally know of, which have started in make these machines, and various variants of it, which is beautiful, because just like with the grains, I do believe in diversity in the processing as well. And there are multiple options. As an entrepreneur, there is an avenue for making machines or using these machines to process grains, or as an entrepreneur who is looking beyond the machines and the processing. If you are looking to set up a system and the food, engineer the food chain, the food system, not the food chain, but rather the food system, there are beautiful avenues for that, where we talk about this whole idea of community scale processing and processing close to the producer and or the consumer, both ways. And there are lots of opportunities. So we have a couple of sessions devoted to this later on. I think the 9th and the 10th sessions is what I would recommend for anybody who's interested in these things. That would be on the 28th and 31st of this month. We will also have one session on mechanized processing itself, and I believe that is on 25th, or maybe the one before that on 22nd. I'm not sure. Please check out the calendar on KMW 2020 and the millet.org/KMW 2020, and join us for those sessions. And I'll be sharing more information there, and we will have a longer discussion on this in that session as well.
Okay, let's come to the most important one, Dwiji. I think Dinesh can also come in. So, does RRA promote any efforts on investment by non-farmers for machines, tools to help small, medium farmers for millet processing? It need not be fund or a charity or a donation, so that The funds are not charity or donation, and primarily non-financial outcomes, where community farming is restored, empowerment is complete with millet growing, farming, processing, and marketing.
Yeah. Um, Very pertinent question. And unfortunately, Dinesh is not here. He probably lost
Okay.
connection or another engagement. But I can speak on his behalf because I know this quite well. Yes, RRA network does support non-farmers also to set up processing units. We do have programs or opportunities for anybody who's interested in processing, anybody who wants to take up some role in the millet value chain, to be trained to plug into opportunities through the network. So feel free to contact us if you have any such ideas in mind, or if anybody you know or you work with would like to access such opportunities, such avenues. Now, coming to this aspect of, I'm very happy to see the words like community farming and empowerment in the Q&A, because it's very important for us to keep this in the focus. And both the Millet Foundation and the RRA network has been working both on the ground as well as at the policy level in order or with these principles in mind. So the idea is not just about millets, but the idea is about the larger food system, the larger, the social components of the food system. And it's very important that people who think along these lines act on it. And we look forward to hearing from whoever asked this question. I'm sorry I didn't catch the name, but do contact us if you would like to, participate in these activities.
Okay. Yes, I think we've come to the last one.
Okay.
All the questions are over. It just says somebody's asked, like, can I use a mixer grinder available at home to mill finger millet into flour? So that's the question.
Well, I would say yes, but with a lot of hesitation.
Yeah.
See, typically, if you remember, because I think we still have a few minutes, I'll give a slightly longer answer to this. Anita, if you feel that it's going too long, feel free to interrupt.
One more to add to that, Viji. Apart from the finger millet, there's one more. The small millets also. Is there a machinery separate for flour and broken? So you can, I think, add that also. This is the last one that has arrived now. Okay.
No, I didn't understand the second question.
The second question is, other than ragi, it says like other millets, are there machineries separate for flour and for broken grits? Is there a separate machinery for flour and broken?
No, yeah. Sorry, I didn't understand that properly, but I got it now. So, so I'll give a slightly longer answer, but to the first one. So I'll take the second one first, because the second one is a shorter answer. No, there are no separate. We don't need separate machines for grits to make grits out of any grain for that matter. We can use a flour mill, but just set it appropriately so that you will get grits rather than flour. Invariably, some part of it will come out as flour. So when you change the setting, you will get more grits and less flour. Or when you change the setting again, you can set it such that you will get more flour and very little grits. So it all depends on the quality of the machine, the condition of the machine, and various other things, and the grains as well. But largely speaking, you can use the same machine that you use to make flour to make grits as well. But not always the case, but most machines have that flexibility. Now, for the first question, can I use a grinder, a blender, mixie, a domestic mixie in order to get flour? Well, in order to get flour, what we have to understand is that the grains have to be really crushed. It's not just about cutting it. In a mixer or blender, we don't have a crushing force. We have a cutting force. So as it goes through and impacts with the blade multiple times, it gets cut into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. But as you can imagine, it will never be the same as a crushed flour from a crushing operation. And in fact, if you well, that is one aspect. The second aspect is the energy that is required. You will have to run the mixer for a considerable amount of time in order to get it into a flour, and much shorter amount of time if you are using the right tool. So while it's possible, I would discourage it because it doesn't give you good quality and it takes a lot of energy. By quality, I mean it won't give you the same product. And the third thing, which is the most important thing, is that the longer you run the mixer, the hotter the material is going to become. And because these grains, millets especially, have a good amount of oil in them, which is the healthy oil that we need. And when you heat up oil, it starts oxidizing, at an exponentially higher rate. And oxidation basically means rancidity, which means that it starts smelling much sooner. And that is why, and I mentioned this in some of the earlier presentations also, when you look at the bajra or jawar or even ragi flour, we tend to use it within a few days of having it milled, especially when we have it milled in a mechanized mill. If you are doing a hand milling, then it has a much better quality because it doesn't get heated up so much. In a hand stone, flour mill, hand driven or manual stone mill. So that's the long answer for that, but very important to recognize some of these aspects because they change the cooking quality, they change the taste, they change the nutritive value as well.
Dviji, we come to the last one.
The absolute last one. After that, let's take your comments, please.
Yeah, after that, this is the last because we have no time. So information on metrics from sowing inputs to processed outputs. On metrics from sowing inputs to processed outputs in terms of economy and food security.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the last.
Very, very good question. I'm so thrilled today. We are getting so many good questions. It's very important that we have metrics, but I would remind, and we do need to establish some metrics, but these metrics cannot be the same that we have for paddy and in the current food system right now. There are two reasons for this. One is that, as I mentioned, these are rain-fed crops. A lot of variations are expected in these grains, whether it comes to the size, color, taste, various physical properties also change with season, with cultivation practices, with how it's processed. So while we need metrics, we need to be very sensitive to and design our metrics in such a way that they reflect this reality and accommodate the requirement of sustainability. So right now we do not have such metrics. We need to build these metrics. There are a few initiatives that the Indian Institute for Millet Research has taken up. There are some initiatives that we are deliberating on in the working group of millets in RRA network to develop such metrics. But the lack of such metrics is sorely felt. And but there is also a sense of caution to be kept in mind when looking at this, because establishing metrics should not become imposing standards which come from outside the ecosystem, but rather are very much tuned to the ecosystem and the requirements of our food systems.
Yes, Vijay, we've come to the last of the questions. That's it. So,
okay. So
you've answered all the questions.
Share your concluding remarks. And
yes, okay. Just to summarize the whole presentation today, processing plays a very important role, as Vijay was telling, because of the small millets cannot be eaten raw, and also millets are of different size, shape, and the nature of the grain, either if the surface is hard or just a husk, and the grain bonding. So basically processing is the most critical part. So until date, much of the effort, like you said, was only to increase millet productivity at farm level. And we have never seen processing as continuation to the process. And also there has been a lot of, I think because millets took a back step in our production system or the consumption, the skill development is the most needed in the processing setups now, and skill development with regard to quality, with regard to machinery handling, with regard to production of quality grains also. So manual processing is, like you said, you consider it as a very hard physical effort, and so mechanized processing of small units at the farm gate is an ideal proposition that could extend the cultivation as well as increase the consumption in our country. So we need technologies which process to improve quality of millets, keeping in the nutrition and the edible properties, and increase household consumption both at the urban and the rural level. So you spoke about the millet increasing shelf life of millet. So processing also is one part of increasing the shelf life of millets. So I think I sum up the whole thing to say that production at one level and processing at the farm gate level is what everybody is looking at for in continuation to the millets. That's the way forward. Okay, Dwiji.
Thank you, Anita, for a nice summary. Just before we close, we have 6 more sessions coming up every third day, and the next section is going to be on Saturday the 16th. Grain characteristics is what we'll focus on, the type of grains, the structure, the nutrition comparison to other cereal grains, and also addressing a lot of the storage related issues, because there are certain grain characteristics that we should recognize when it comes to storage issues. So anybody who's interested in these topics, this topic or the other topics that we are going to address, it's all on the webpage, themillet.org/KMW2020. Please go check out, and all the slides and the recordings and the Q&A from the sessions, and some kind of a summary of each session in numbers is also shared on the webpage. Feel free to browse and share with friends and colleagues and family. Do spread the word. The registration is still open for all the upcoming sessions. I look forward to more interesting questions and even better questions as we go further into the series. Thank you, Anita. Thank you to the entire team for putting this session together. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us for a very informative and lively discussion.